Welcome back to the Beyond Practice podcast. I'm Taylor Grant, and this is the show that helps you ditch the theory and learn practical skills to be a better leader.
I'm Casey Bishop, and I'm here to help you figure out how to lead through all kinds of changes and build teams that not only survive those changes, but actually thrive because of them.
Big shout out to John LaForest for supporting the show. We really appreciate you, John.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Now, for this deep dive, it's episode 5 to be exact.
Yeah.
We're really going deep into something super important today.
Yes.
Building a culture of team adaptability and resilience. And let's face it, change is the only constant, right?
Definitely. And being able to handle the tough times and come out even stronger, well, that's what makes a truly great team.
Exactly. So today we'll be talking about 2 really powerful frameworks, the adaptive leadership model and the SCAR-5 model. These tools are all about helping leaders like you create teams that are psychologically safe and flexible.
Because when people feel safe and like they can adapt, they can achieve incredible things.
I know you might be thinking adaptability and resilience sound like more corporate buzzwords, but trust me, there's so much more than that. To show you what I mean, let's take a quick look at disaster management.
Imagine first responders dealing with a wildfire or a hurricane. They have to change their plans on the fly as the situation changes, make tough decisions in seconds under a ton of pressure, and support each other when things get really hard.
It all comes down to whether they can adapt and bounce back. For them, it's literally a matter of life or death.
Exactly. And while most of us don't have jobs that are that intense, the same principles apply to any team that's facing uncertainty and change.
Think about it. Unexpected market shifts, crazy new technologies,
Yeah.
sudden restructuring within your company.
Yeah.
We've all been there, right?
Absolutely. So whether you're leading a team, part of a team, or just trying to figure out your own career path, these ideas can really change things for the better.
Okay, so to start us off, let's talk about the Burke-Litwin change model. This model was created to give leaders a complete view of all the different things that affect an organization when it needs to change.
And one of the best things about this model is that it shows how change is never simple. It's a complicated process with a bunch of interconnected elements.
Let's unpack that. The model starts by looking at the drivers of change. These are split into external forces and internal forces. External forces are things happening outside the organization. Market conditions, new technologies, new regulations, basically anything that's making the organization have to change.
Right, and then you have internal forces X. These are things happening inside the organization that also push for change. It could be anything from new leadership to cultural changes, or a new strategy for the company. For example, imagine a company that's always relied on physical stores. Then suddenly everyone's shopping online and their sales go way down. That's a classic example of an external force demanding change.
Makes sense. What would be an example of an internal force?
Let's say there's a big change in leadership at that same company. A new CEO comes in and they have this big vision for changing the entire business. That's an internal force pushing the need to adapt.
Okay, so the Burke-Litwin model helps us see what needs to change. But that's not all. It also gives us a framework for actually leading that change the right way.
Exactly. It goes beyond just figuring out the problem. It gives us a roadmap for how to make those changes happen.
Right. And that roadmap starts with what the model calls transformational factors. These are the big, high-level things that really affect an organization's ability to change. They include mission and strategy, leadership, and organizational culture. So if someone's listening right now, how do these transformational factors affect their team's ability to adapt?
Well, let's start with mission and strategy. Having a really clear mission gives everyone in the organization something to aim for. Like they all understand why they're doing what they're doing. And when you combine that mission with a strategy that's flexible, well, it becomes your roadmap for figuring out how to navigate all the changes happening around you.
I like that analogy, a roadmap. It's not about having this rigid plan, but more like having a clear direction and some guidelines that allow you to make adjustments along the way.
Right. It's like having a compass that points you in the right direction, even when the path is bumpy.
Okay, so mission and strategy are important. But then there's leadership. How important is leadership in all of this?
Leadership is absolutely crucial. Leaders set the tone for how everyone in the organization deals with change. Think about it. Do they show that they're adaptable themselves? Do they encourage people to try new things and learn from their mistakes? Are they open and honest when they talk about the challenges and opportunities that come with change?
Because actions speak louder than words.
Right.
If the leader seems like they don't want to change,
Yeah.
or if they send mixed messages, it
Hmm.
just makes everyone confused and undermines the whole process.
Totally. Leaders need to be the change they want to see in their teams.
All right, so we've got mission and strategy, we've got leadership. What about organizational culture? That seems like a big one.
Organizational culture is huge. It's all about those unwritten rules, the shared values,
Hmm.
the unspoken things that shape how work actually gets done.
It's not just about having fancy mission statements on the wall. It's about those everyday behaviors, the things that people just assume are true
Mm,
that affect how they work together and get things done.
exactly. And a culture that truly helps people adapt is one where people feel safe taking risks, trying new things, and challenging the way things are done. It's where collaboration and open communication are just normal, not something special. And where making mistakes is seen as a chance to learn and grow, not a reason to blame and punish people.
So if you're leading a team
Hmm.
and you're trying to build this kind of adaptive culture, where do you even start?
Well, the Burke-Litwin model actually breaks it down further into what it calls transactional factors.
Hmm.
These factors focus on the day-to-day stuff that happens in an organization and how those things can either help or hurt adaptability.
Okay, let's hear about these transactional
Yep.
factors. What
Yep.
kind of things are we talking about here?
We're talking about things like the structure of the organization, how the team works together, what each person is responsible for, the skills and abilities they have, and even their individual needs and values.
So it's like a big picture view of how the organization works every day.
Yeah.
But how do all of these things actually make a team more adaptable? Let's take the organizational structure, for example. How can that help or hurt a team's ability to adapt?
Well, imagine a company that's very hierarchical, where every decision has to go through a bunch of managers. That can be really slow and difficult,
Yeah.
especially when you need to react quickly to change.
It's like trying to turn a giant ship really fast. Not easy.
Exactly. Now compare that to a more flexible structure, where teams have the power to make decisions without going through a ton of bureaucracy. This kind of structure is much more adaptable, allowing teams to respond to change much faster.
It's like the difference between that huge ship and a speedboat. So for building an adaptable team, a more flexible structure is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely. And then there's the team's climate, basically how the team works together. A positive team climate, one where people trust each other, collaborate well, and communicate openly, is really important for building a team that's adaptable and resilient.
I can see that.
Mhm.
When people feel safe to say what they think, share ideas, and even bring up concerns without being judged, it creates a much better environment for everyone to adapt.
Exactly. It all comes back to that feeling of psychological safety. When people feel safe, they're more likely to try new things, step outside their comfort zones, and embrace change.
Okay, so we've talked about structure and team climate.
Hmm.
What about those other transactional factors, like task requirements, individual skills and abilities, and individual needs and values? How do those help build adaptable teams?
When it comes to tasks and skills, it's
Mm,
all about making sure people have what they need to do the work that's being asked of them. This is especially true when those tasks are changing a lot.
right, because just throwing people into new situations without the right tools and support isn't going to help anyone adapt.
Exactly. It might mean providing training, giving people chances to learn new skills, or even changing job roles to better fit what the organization needs.
So it's all about being proactive and setting people up for success.
Absolutely. And then when we talk about individual needs and values, it's really important to remember that change affects everyone differently. Some people love change and find it exciting, while others find it super stressful and unsettling.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to change.
Exactly. Leaders who understand these differences
Yeah.
and can adjust their approach to each person can really help people navigate change much better.
Okay, so the Burke-Litwin model gives us this solid framework for understanding how change works on a large scale and how organizations can adapt. But let's zoom in a bit on the individual level. How can we understand and manage how we and our team members react psychologically to change? That's where the SCARF model comes in, right?
Exactly. The SCARF model is a great tool for understanding how our brains react to change and what we can do to make change feel less scary and more manageable.
So let's dive into this SCARF model. What are the key ideas here?
The SCARF model focuses on 5 key areas that affect how we feel threatened or rewarded when it comes to social stuff. These areas are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Understanding these areas can help you, as a leader, create a much safer environment for change.
Okay, I'm interested. Let's talk about each of these areas, starting with status. What does that even mean when we're talking about change?
Status is all about how we see our importance compared to other people. And when we feel like our status is in danger, it triggers a really strong threat response in our brains. This can make us much less open to change.
So, for instance, if someone thinks a change is making their skills or experience seem less valuable,
hmm
they might resist that change.
Exactly. It's about how we see ourselves within the organization. Any change that we think lowers our status can feel very threatening.
That makes sense. So, how can a leader help people maintain their sense of status during times of change?
It's all about acknowledging and valuing people's contributions, even if their jobs are changing. Make sure people are involved in making decisions about the change and give them opportunities to share their ideas and expertise.
It's about showing people they're still valuable,
Hmm.
that their opinions matter, and that their expertise is still important, even as things change.
Exactly. It's about respecting their experience and knowledge, even if the way they work is changing.
Okay, so status is a big deal. What about certainty? How does that affect how we respond to change?
Our brains really want things to be certain and predictable. It's how we're wired. So when we're faced with uncertainty, it triggers a threat response, making us feel anxious and less open to new things.
I think we've all felt that. Change can be scary because it messes up our sense of knowing what's going to happen next.
Right. So to minimize that feeling of threat, leaders need to be as open as possible about how change is happening.
So even if you don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
it's better to be upfront about what you do know, what you don't know, and what you're doing to find out more.
Exactly. Clear, honest communication, even when things are uncertain, can help people feel more grounded and less anxious.
Okay, that makes sense. What about autonomy? That seems like a basic human need.
Totally. Autonomy is all about feeling in control of your life and your work. When we feel like we have choices and can make our own decisions, we're much more likely to accept change.
But when it feels like change is being forced on us, without any say in the matter, that can trigger a really strong negative reaction.
Exactly. It's about feeling empowered, not helpless.
So when leading a team through change, how do you make sure people still feel like they have some control?
That's a great question. There are a few strategies leaders can use to help people feel autonomous during times of transition. One really good strategy is to get people involved in the decision-making process as much as you can, even if they can't make every single decision. Giving them some choices and control over how things change can make a big difference.
So it's not about telling people what to do, but more about giving them options and letting them be part of finding the solution.
Exactly. When people feel like they have a voice and that their perspective matters, they're much more likely to get on board with the change.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about status, certainty, and autonomy. What about relatedness?
Yeah.
Where does that fit in with the SCARF model?
Relatedness is all about our need to feel connected and like we belong. When we feel like we're part of a team or a community, we're much stronger when facing change.
Because we know we have people to support us. We're not going through it by ourselves.
Right. So when you're leading a team through change, it's super important to create opportunities for people to connect, share their experiences, and help each other out.
So that might mean team building activities, regular check-ins, or even just creating a space where people can talk about their frustrations and worries in a safe and supportive environment.
Exactly. It's all about fostering a sense of camaraderie and reminding people that they're not alone in this.
Okay, so relatedness is about that feeling of connection. What about fairness?
Mhm.
How does that play into how we respond to change?
Fairness is about whether we feel like we're being treated fairly and equally. And when we feel like things aren't fair or that decisions are being made randomly, it can trigger a really strong negative reaction in us.
I get that. No one wants to feel like they're being treated unfairly, especially during times of change, when there's already so much uncertainty and stress.
Right. So to help create a sense of fairness, leaders need to be as transparent as they can about how they're making decisions. Make sure everyone has access to the same information, apply rules consistently, and be open to feedback.
It's not just about being fair, but also about making sure people see that you're being fair.
Exactly. Transparency and open communication are key when it comes to fairness.
All right, so we've covered a lot. We talked about the Burke-Litwin Model,
Yeah.
which helps us understand the big picture of change and how organizations can adapt. And we've dug into the SCARF model, which gives us insight into how to make change feel less threatening and more rewarding to our brains. But I bet you're wondering, how can you actually use these models in your own life? How can you take these ideas and use them to build teams that are more adaptable and resilient?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's all about putting these ideas into action. So let's start with the Burke-Litwin model. First, really think about what's driving the need for change on your team. What are those external and internal forces that are making you have to adapt?
Once you get why things need to change, you can start looking at those transformational and transactional factors we discussed. Think about it. Is your team's mission still relevant? Is your strategy flexible enough to handle these changes? Are you, as a leader, showing the kind of adaptability you want to see from your team? Does your organization's culture allow for risk-taking and learning from mistakes?
Exactly. Asking yourself these questions will help you figure out where you are and what areas you might need to focus on. Then when it comes to those transactional factors, it's time to take a closer look at how your team is structured, the climate within the team, the specific tasks that need to be done, the skills and resources people need, and how you, as a leader, can create an environment where people feel supported and ready to adapt.
I like that. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to experiment, try new things, and make mistakes without being judged or punished.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is fundamental to building a team that's adaptable and resilient.
Okay, so the Burke-Litwin model helps us see the big picture
Mm.
of how change works in organizations and how they can adapt. But what about the Scaroff model? How can we use that in our everyday interactions and leadership to help people deal with change more effectively?
The SCARF model is all about being aware of those 5 key areas: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. When you're leading your team through change, think about it. How can you talk to people in a way that doesn't make them feel like their status is threatened? How can you make things feel more certain by being open and honest about how the change is happening? How can you give people choices and a sense of control, even when things are in flux?
Those are good questions. And it's about thinking beyond ourselves and considering how change affects other people. As leaders, how can we create that sense of connection and belonging within our teams so people feel supported and know they're not going through it alone?
Hmm.
And how can we make sure that decisions are made fairly and transparently so that everyone feels like they're being respected?
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about being a good leader, it's about being a good person. We all have a part to play in creating a world that's more adaptable and resilient.
It's so true. So we've talked a lot about how leaders can use these models, but what about people who aren't in leadership roles? Can these models still help them?
Definitely. Even if you're not the one making all the decisions, you can still use these models to understand how you react to change and find ways to navigate those changes better.
For example, if you're feeling stressed about a change at work, you can use the SCARF model to figure out exactly what parts of that change are making you feel stressed.
Exactly. Ask yourself, do you feel like your status is being threatened? Are you looking for more certainty? Do you feel like you've lost control? Once you know what's causing your stress, you can start to come up with ways to deal with it better.
Right. Maybe you need to talk to your boss about your concerns. Or maybe you can find ways to feel more in control by taking on new challenges
Hmm.
or finding opportunities to be more involved in the decision-making process.
And don't forget the Burke-Litwin model. It reminds us to step back and see the bigger picture, to understand why the change is happening and how our work fits into the overall goals of the organization.
Because it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day craziness
Yeah,
and forget why we're doing what we're doing.
exactly. When we understand the why, it can make it much easier to handle new challenges and adapt to change.
All right, so to recap, whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your career, the Burke-Litwin and SCARF models can be super helpful tools for navigating the constantly changing world of work.
For sure. The key takeaway here is to not just understand these models in theory, but to actually use them, try them out, and see what works best for you, your team, and your organization.
Because in the end, it's not about being perfect. It's about accepting that change is messy and unpredictable and finding ways to not just survive, but thrive in the middle of it all.
And remember, change is an opportunity for growth, innovation, and you know what? Even fun.
I love that, embracing the chaos and finding the fun in it all. Okay, so as we finish up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one last thought-provoking question.
Think about your own work, your team, even your personal life. Where do you see a need for more adaptability and resilience? What small steps can you take, starting right now, to use these models and create positive change?
Maybe it's starting a conversation with your team about the Scaroff model, or maybe it's just becoming more aware of how you react to change. Every little bit helps. We'd love to hear what you think. Share your insights, your challenges, your aha moments on social media using hashtag #BeyondPracticePodcast.
And don't forget to check out our show notes for more resources, templates, and tools.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to take a minute to address a question that comes up a lot when we talk about adaptability and resilience.
You mean the question of whether you're born with these qualities or if you can develop them over time?
Exactly. Are some people just naturally more adaptable and resilient than others? Or can anyone learn to embrace change and bounce back from setbacks? What do you think?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is both. Some people might be naturally inclined towards adaptability and resilience, maybe because of their personality, how they were raised, or their life
So
experiences.
some people have a bit of a head start.
Right. But that doesn't mean that other people can't develop these qualities. Actually, I believe that adaptability and resilience are skills that you can learn and get better at over time with effort and practice.
That's good to hear. So it's not about being born with some magic adaptability gene. It's about being willing to try new things, take on challenges, and build those mental muscles that help us bend without breaking.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the better we get. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. At first, it feels weird and wobbly. You might fall a few times, get some scrapes. But with practice, it becomes like second nature.
I love that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with adaptability and resilience. The more we face those challenges,
Mm-hmm.
the more we learn how to handle them. And the more confident we become that we can deal with whatever life throws at us.
Exactly. So if you're someone who usually avoids change, or if you have trouble bouncing back from setbacks, don't worry, you can develop those skills. It starts with being aware, understanding how you respond to change, and then choosing to push yourself outside your comfort zone a little at a time.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Surround yourself with people who support you. Find mentors. And don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
For sure. Building a culture of adaptability and resilience is something we do together. It's about helping each other, learning from each other, and celebrating each other's wins along the way.
All right, so to wrap up this episode of the Beyond Practice podcast, we want to leave you with this. Change is going to happen. We can't stop it. But we can choose how we react to it. We can resist it, be afraid of it,
Yeah.
and let it take over.
Or we can choose to embrace it, see it as a chance to grow, and use it to make positive changes in our lives.
So go out there and be the change you want to see in the world.
And remember, we're here to support you every step of the way.
Thanks for joining us on the Beyond Practice podcast. We'll see you next week.
Until then, keep moving beyond the theory and into action.